I left on a 3-day sales trip, and when I came back, my $58 shampoo bottle was already half empty, even though my bald husband never touched it. I knew someone else was using it, so I added a special ingredient to the bottle. No one expected what I saw when I returned home. My name is Christine, and I'm 48 years old. The October morning air bit through my wool coat as I dragged my sales case up the front steps, the familiar ache in my shoulders reminding me why I kept promising myself to pack lighter. The house smelled faintly of coffee and that particular staleness that settles when someone's been living alone for 3 days. Not unpleasant, just different from the usual rhythm of two people sharing space. Dylan appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his pajama pants at 10 a.m., coffee mug in hand. After 23 years of marriage, I'd grown accustomed to his work-from-home consultant schedule, which apparently didn't require pants before noon. "How was Dallas?" he asked, the kind of automatic question spouses ask when they've heard the same travel stories for 2 decades. "Productive," I replied, equally automatic. "The Henderson account finally signed." I hauled my case upstairs, already thinking about a hot shower to wash away the airplane air and hotel staleness. It had been a good trip. 3 solid days of presentations, client dinners, and the particular satisfaction that comes from closing deals that have been months in the making. As a regional sales manager, I traveled maybe 8 times a year, usually for 3-day stretches, and I'd learned to pack efficiently and find small comforts in the routine. That's when I noticed it. My luxury lavender jasmine shampoo, a beautiful, heavy bottle that cost more than some people spend on groceries in a week, sat on the shower shelf looking decidedly diminished. I picked it up, weighing it in my palm. When I'd left 3 days ago, it had been nearly full. Now it was barely half. I stared at it for a long moment, running calculations in my head. 3 days. Dylan's head has been shiny bald since his 30s. Even if he'd suddenly developed a secret urge to wash the hair he doesn't have, there was no mathematical way this bottle should be this empty. "Dylan," I called downstairs, "did you use my shampoo for something?" "What?" came his voice from what I assumed was still the kitchen. "No, why would I?" Why would he, indeed? I set the bottle back on its shelf and tried to shake off the odd feeling settling in my stomach. Maybe I'd been mistaken about how much had been left. Maybe the bottle was more full of air than I'd realized. Travel fatigue could make anyone imagine things. But as I shampooed my hair with what remained, savoring the expensive scent that I'd convinced myself was worth the cost as my one small indulgence, I couldn't quite dismiss the nagging sense that something was off. The bathroom felt different too. Not obviously disturbed, but like someone had been moving things around and putting them back just slightly wrong. The towels were folded, but not the way I folded them. There was a damp washcloth in the hamper that I didn't remember using before I left. "Don't be paranoid, Christine," I muttered to myself as I wrapped my hair in a towel. "You're tired. You're imagining things." But over the following weeks, as I prepared for and returned from subsequent trips, the pattern became harder to ignore. My expensive conditioner depleted at an alarming rate. A lavender bath bomb I'd been saving vanished entirely. Most tellingly, I'd find damp towels in the guest bathroom that we hadn't had actual guests in for months. Each time I mentioned these observations to Dylan, his response was the same practiced dismissal. I was stressed from travel, I was forgetting how much I'd used, I was being a little obsessive about household inventory. His tone carried that particular patience men sometimes use when they think their wives are being adorably irrational about domestic details. "Honey," he'd say, "you've got a lot on your mind with work. It's not surprising you'd lose track of a few toiletries." I learned to stop mentioning it, but I didn't stop noticing. The most unsettling part wasn't the missing products. I could afford to replace them, even if it stung to lose $58 worth of shampoo to some unknown cause. It was the growing awareness that something was happening in my house, in my private space, while I was away. The feeling that someone was moving through my home, using my things, existing in my absence in a way that felt like a violation I couldn't quite name. During my cousin Linda's birthday party in early November, Her sister Margie pulled me aside while we were helping clear dessert plates. "Christine, you look tired," she said, studying my face with the directness that comes from decades of family familiarity. "Are you getting enough sleep?" "I sleep better on the road than I do at home lately," I admitted, then immediately felt disloyal for saying it. I don't know why. "That's odd," Margie said thoughtfully. "Usually people sleep worse in hotels." She wasn't wrong. I'd become one of those people who looked forward to business trips, not just for the work, but for the uninterrupted sleep in crisp hotel sheets, the quiet morning coffee in anonymous lobby spaces, the strange peace of being responsible only for myself. At home, I'd taken to sleeping restlessly, aware of every sound, every shift in the familiar space around me. The young man next door had appeared more frequently in my peripheral vision lately. Jake, I thought his name was, mid-20s, with shoulder-length brown hair that caught the light when he was working in his yard. He'd helped me carry my heavy sales case from the car once when Dylan was busy with a work call, and I'd been grateful for the neighborly gesture. He seemed polite enough, the kind of young man who said, "Yes, ma'am," and held doors. I'd seen him more often recently, coming and going at odd hours, always looking freshly groomed in a way that suggested regular access to quality hair care products. But that was probably just a coincidence. Young men these days took better care of their appearance than Dylan's generation ever had. Still, the pieces of the puzzle rattled around in my mind like loose change in a pocket. The depleted toiletries, the damp towels, Dylan's dismissive responses, my growing unease in my own home. I told myself I was being silly, possibly even paranoid. But silly doesn't explain half-empty shampoo bottles when the only person who could have used them doesn't have hair to wash. Something was happening in my house while I was away. I just didn't know what. If you're wondering what I discovered next, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because what happened when I set my trap was something none of us expected. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to play detective in your own home. Yet. The December trip to Phoenix should have been routine. 3 days, 2 client meetings, 1 hotel with decent room service. I packed my usual travel bag, kissed Dylan goodbye as he sat hunched over his laptop in yesterday's t-shirt, and drove to the airport with my mind already shifting into work mode. But before I left, I did something different. I took a photo of my shampoo bottle, not with my phone where Dylan might accidentally see it, but with the small digital camera I kept for photographing product displays. I measured the liquid level against the label, noting exactly where the lavender-tinted contents reached on the bottle's curve. Call it paranoia. Call it due diligence. I called it gathering evidence. The Phoenix meetings went well. The Hartley Group signed a 2-year extension worth more than my annual salary, and I celebrated with room service champagne and a long bath in the hotel's oversized tub. For 3 days, I existed in that peaceful bubble that business travel creates. Anonymous, efficient, responsible only for my own schedule and success. I should have been happy driving home. Instead, I found myself gripping the steering wheel tighter as I turned onto our street. That familiar knot of anxiety settling in my stomach like a stone. The house looked exactly as I'd left it. Dylan's car in the driveway, newspapers scattered on the porch, where he'd collected them haphazardly, the living room lamp glowing through the front window. Everything normal. Everything exactly as it should be. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, set my suitcase on the bed, and walked directly to the bathroom. The shampoo bottle sat in its usual spot on the shower shelf, looking innocent enough. I picked it up, half empty, again. This time, I didn't call down to Dylan. I didn't mention it. I didn't question my own memory or wonder if I'd miscalculated. I simply stood there in my bathroom, holding a bottle that had somehow lost 3 days' worth of expensive shampoo, while being tended by a bald man who'd shown no interest in hair care for the past 2 decades. That night, Dylan worked late, or at least he said he was working late. At 11:30 p.m., while I was already in bed reading, my phone buzzed with a text from him. "Still at the office. Deadline crunch. Don't wait up." I read the message twice. Dylan worked from home. had worked from home for 8 years. His office was the spare bedroom down the hall, where his computer was currently humming quietly in sleep mode, the monitor dark. I set my book aside and walked to the window. Our driveway was empty. The pieces clicked together with the awful clarity of a lock turning. Not someone else using my bathroom while I was away. Someone else being invited to use my bathroom while I was away. Someone with long, beautiful hair that required expensive products to maintain its shine. My hands began to shake, not with fear, but with the cold fury that comes from realizing you've been made a fool of. Not just betrayed, but dismissed, gasped at, treated like a woman too stupid to notice when her own possessions were being shared with someone else. I walked back to the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. 48 years old, 23 years of marriage, a successful career that required me to be sharp, observant, and detail-oriented when dealing with clients. And somehow I'd let myself be convinced that I was imagining things when my own instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The really infuriating part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was Dylan's patient, condescending responses every time I'd mentioned the missing toiletries. The way he'd made me feel like I was being neurotic, obsessive, difficult. The way he'd managed to make me apologize for noticing that someone was using my things. At 12:45 a.m., I heard Dylan's car in the driveway. I pretended to be asleep as he crept upstairs, moving with the exaggerated quiet of someone trying not to wake a sleeping spouse. He smelled like soap, good soap, the kind I bought for our guest bathroom. "How was your day?" he whispered, settling into bed. "Fine," I whispered back, my eyes closed. "Productive." He kissed my forehead with the casual affection of a man who thought his secret was safe. I lay still until his breathing deepened into sleep, then stared at the ceiling until dawn. The next morning, over coffee and toast, Dylan mentioned that our young neighbor Jake had been having some personal problems. "Poor kid's going through a rough patch with his living situation," Dylan said, not meeting my eyes as he scrolled through his phone. "I told him he could use our guest shower if needed, just until he gets back on his feet." "How generous of you," I said, my voice level. "I mean, we're hardly using that bathroom anyway," Dylan continued, "and he's such a polite kid, always offers to help with yard work." I took a careful sip of my coffee. "When did this arrangement start?" "Oh, a few weeks ago, maybe. Time flies." Dylan waved his hand vaguely. "I didn't think you'd mind. You're always saying we should be good neighbors." "A few weeks ago, right around the time my toiletries had started disappearing at an accelerated rate." "Of course I don't mind," I said. "We should definitely help neighbors in need." Dylan looked relieved. "I knew you'd understand. Jake's really grateful. He mentioned how much he appreciates having access to, proper facilities. Proper facilities, including my $58 shampoo, apparently." That afternoon, while Dylan was on a work call, I walked over to Jake's house and rang the doorbell. He answered, looking freshly showered, his long brown hair gleaming with health and clearly recently conditioned. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Morrison," he said, and I caught the faint scent of lavender and jasmine drifting from his hair. "Please, call me Christine," I said with my warmest smile. "Dylan mentioned you've been having some housing troubles. I wanted to make sure you know you're welcome to use our guest facilities any time you need to." Relief flooded his young face. "Thank you so much. I wasn't sure Dylan said it was okay, but I didn't want to assume." "No assumptions necessary," I said. "Though I do hope you don't mind that I use rather expensive hair products. I know they can be a bit strong for some people." "Oh no, they're perfect," Jake said enthusiastically. "That lavender stuff? It's incredible. My hair's never looked better." "I'm so glad," I said. "Well, I should let you get back to your day." As I walked back to my house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Absolute clarity. No more wondering. No more second-guessing my own observations. No more allowing myself to be convinced that I was imagining things. Dylan had been letting another man use our bathroom, use my expensive toiletries, without asking me. Worse, he'd made me feel crazy for noticing. But worst of all, when I'd finally given him the perfect opportunity to tell me the truth this morning, he'd lied about when it started and failed to mention the small detail of Jake washing his magnificent hair with products that cost more than some people make in a day. That evening, Dylan announced he'd be working late again. Big project, he said, not looking up from his laptop. Might not be home until after midnight. Of course, I said. I understand completely. But this time, I understood everything. I didn't sleep that night. At exactly 3:17 a.m., I gave up the pretense and padded downstairs to the kitchen in my robe and slippers. Dylan had come home around 1 a.m., moving through the house with that same exaggerated quiet, smelling again of expensive soap and shampoo, my soap and shampoo. The kitchen felt different in the pre-dawn darkness, quieter, more honest somehow. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat at the table with my laptop, the blue glow of the screen the only light in the house. For the first time in months, my mind felt completely clear. Not angry, not hurt. Those emotions would come later, I was sure. Right now, I felt the cool, methodical focus that had made me successful in sales. I had a problem that required a solution, and I was very good at solving problems. I opened a new browser window and began typing. First, I logged into our joint savings account and transferred $8,500 into my individual checking account, money I'd earned from the Henderson and Hartley contracts. Not everything, nothing that would trigger immediate alerts, just enough to give me options. Then I opened a second browser tab and searched for divorce attorneys in our area, bookmarking 3 with excellent reviews and reasonable fees. In a third tab, I researched short-term apartment rentals. Nothing fancy, just clean and available with minimal notice. I favorited 2 listings within my budget, both furnished, both accepting month-to-month leases. The practical arrangements took less than an hour. The real planning would be more delicate. I walked upstairs to our bathroom and opened the medicine cabinet. Behind the aspirin and vitamin bottles, I found what I was looking for. A small tube of professional color depositing mask I'd purchased months ago during a spa weekend with my sister. Emerald Envy, the label read, semi-permanent color enhancement for adventurous hair. I'd bought it on impulse, thinking I might try adding some subtle highlights, but had never worked up the courage to use it. The product was completely harmless, designed for salon use, temporary, would wash out after several shampoos, but it would leave a vivid, unmistakable green tint that would last for days, maybe weeks if the hair was particularly porous or damaged. I carried my expensive lavender jasmine shampoo to the kitchen and carefully poured out exactly half the contents into a measuring cup. Then I squeezed the entire tube of color mask into the bottle, added a small amount of the original shampoo back to achieve the right consistency, and shook gently until the mixture looked uniform. The color was barely visible in the amber bottle. Someone using it quickly, without examining it closely, would never notice the subtle green tint. But once it contacted hair and activated with water and heat, the transformation would be dramatic and immediate. I returned the bottle to its exact position on the shower shelf and sat back down at my kitchen table with my tea. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. No confrontations, no accusations, no dramatic scenes that Dylan could later reframe as me being hysterical or unreasonable. Just consequences. Natural, visible, undeniable consequences that would make the situation impossible to hide or deny. By dawn, I had everything arranged. 3 divorce attorney consultations scheduled for the following week, a furnished studio apartment held with a deposit, my most important documents copied and stored in a safe deposit box Dylan didn't know about, an email drafted to my boss requesting a few days of personal leave. The only variable was timing. I needed to be away when Jake used the shampoo, but not so far away that I'd miss the results. The perfect opportunity presented itself 2 days later. Dylan mentioned casually over breakfast that he'd be working late again that evening, code, I now understood, for Jake's visit. Actually, I said, as if the thought had just occurred to me, I think I'll drive over to see Linda today. Maybe spend the night, make a girls' weekend of it. Dylan looked up from his coffee with what I interpreted as relief. "That sounds nice. You work so hard, you deserve some time with your sister." "I thought so too," I said pleasantly. "I'll probably leave around noon, be back tomorrow evening." "Perfect timing," Dylan said, and I wondered if he realized how accurate that statement was. I packed an overnight bag with theatrical care, making sure Dylan saw me taking extra clothes and toiletries. I kissed him goodbye at the front door, loaded my car with visible luggage, and drove to the end of our street. Then I parked behind the community center 2 blocks away and walked back. I spent the day at Linda's house, actually, partly for the alibi, partly because I found I needed my sister's steady presence while I waited. I told her everything, watching her face cycle through disbelief, anger, and finally, grudging admiration for my plan. "You're sure about this?" Linda asked as we sat on her back porch with glasses of wine. "Once you do this, there's no going back to pretending you don't know." "I'm tired of pretending," I said. "I'm tired of being made to feel crazy for noticing what's happening in my own house." At 6 p.m., I called Dylan. "Having such a lovely time with Linda," I said brightly. "We're thinking of going to that new restaurant downtown. Don't wait up. I'll probably just stay over rather than drive home late." "Sounds perfect," Dylan said. "Enjoy yourself. You deserve it." I hung up and looked at Linda. He deserves it too. At 7 p.m., I drove back to the community center and took my position. From the parking lot, I had a clear view of our street but was hidden behind a row of pine trees. I settled in with a thermos of coffee and a book, though I found it impossible to concentrate on reading. At 8:23 p.m., I saw Jake walking up our driveway, a small bag in his hand. He let himself in through the front door with what appeared to be his own key. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dylan had given another man a key to our house, but somehow forgotten to mention this detail when explaining Jake's temporary need for shower access. I waited, read the same page 17 times, checked my watch every few minutes, wondered if this was what stakeouts felt like for real detectives, though I suspected they were usually tracking less domestic crimes. At 10:15 p.m., Jake emerged from our house. Even in the streetlight, I could see that his hair looked damp and freshly styled. He walked down the driveway with the confident stride of someone who just enjoyed a thorough grooming session with premium products. I gave him a 10-minute head start, then drove home. Dylan was in the living room, laptop open, maintaining the elaborate fiction of his work night. "You're back early," he said, looking genuinely surprised and slightly panicked. "Linda got a migraine," I said smoothly. "I thought I'd come home and let her rest. How's your project going?" "Oh, you know, making progress." He gestured vaguely at his screen, which I noticed was displaying a basketball game rather than any recognizable work software. "I'm exhausted," I said. "I think I'll just shower and go to bed." In the bathroom, I examined the shampoo bottle. It was noticeably lighter, and when I held it up to the light, I could see the liquid level had dropped by at least an inch. Perfect. I showered quickly with body wash, avoiding the shampoo entirely, and went to bed with the deep satisfaction of someone who'd just set a perfect trap. Tomorrow would be very interesting indeed. I woke up before my alarm, which was unusual for someone who'd barely slept from anticipation. Dylan was still unconscious beside me, snoring softly with the peaceful sleep of someone who believed his secrets were safe. I dressed quietly in my usual Saturday morning clothes, jeans, sweater, comfortable shoes, and went downstairs to make coffee. Through the kitchen window, I could see Jake's house looking perfectly normal in the morning light. No signs of crisis, no emergency vehicles, no indication that anything unusual had happened. For a moment, I wondered if my plan had failed. Maybe the color mask hadn't been potent enough. Maybe Jake had noticed something odd about the shampoo and hadn't used it. Maybe I'd miscalculated the chemistry entirely. Then I reminded myself that these things take time. Hair color needs to process, set, become visible. Professional colorists don't work magic instantly. They work it gradually, with precision. I made myself breakfast and tried to read the newspaper, but concentration proved impossible. Every few minutes I found myself glancing toward Jake's house, looking for any sign of movement, any indication that my little science experiment had worked as intended. At 10:30 a.m., Dylan shuffled downstairs in his weekend uniform of ancient pajama pants and a college t-shirt that had seen better decades. "Morning," he mumbled, heading straight for the coffee pot. "Sleep well?" "Wonderfully," I said, which was technically true. The 3 hours I'd managed had been deeply satisfying. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Dylan glanced out the window without much interest. "Looks like it might rain." Actually, the sky was perfectly clear, but Dylan had never been particularly observant about details, a trait that had served my purposes well over the past few months. At 11:15 a.m., I was washing dishes when I saw movement next door. Jake's front door opened, and he stepped onto his porch to collect what appeared to be a package delivery. Even from across the yard, the change was unmistakable. His previously beautiful brown hair was now a brilliant, artificial shade of green that seemed to glow in the Saturday morning sunlight. Not a subtle tint, not a fashionable highlight, but a vivid, unmistakable emerald that announced itself to anyone within a 3-block radius. I set down my coffee mug carefully, afraid I might drop it from the sheer satisfaction of seeing my plan work so perfectly. Jake stood on his porch for perhaps 30 seconds, long enough for Mrs. Henderson from across the street to emerge from her house for her morning walk, stop dead in her tracks, and stare. Long enough for the delivery driver to do a visible double take and hand over the package with the kind of barely contained expression that suggested this would be a story he'd tell for weeks. Then Jake seemed to realize he was drawing attention. He grabbed his package and ducked back inside with the hasty movements of someone who just realized they'd made a terrible mistake. But it was too late for discretion. Mrs. Henderson was already speed-walking toward the Martinez house 2 doors down, undoubtedly to share the morning's entertainment. The delivery driver was climbing back into his truck with the slow, deliberate movements of someone trying not to laugh out loud. And I was standing at my kitchen window, witnessing the most satisfying moment I'd experienced in years. "Dylan," I called sweetly, "you might want to come see this." "See what?" he asked, wandering over to the window with his coffee mug. I watched his face as he spotted Jake, who had apparently decided that hiding inside wasn't a sustainable strategy, and had emerged again, this time wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. But no baseball cap in existence could contain hair that green. Dylan's coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor in a spray of ceramic and dark liquid. "Oh my God," he whispered. "What happened to Jake's hair?" "I have no idea," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Though it is a very interesting shade of green, don't you think? Very vibrant." Dylan stared out the window as Jake attempted to walk to his car with casual nonchalance, as if nothing unusual had happened. The effect was somewhat undermined by the fact that his hair was now the approximate color of radioactive spinach. "He looks like he stuck his finger in an electrical socket," Dylan said faintly. "Or used the wrong shampoo," I suggested helpfully. Dylan turned to look at me, and I saw the exact moment when understanding dawned in his eyes. The color drained from his face as he processed the implications, the timing, the impossible coincidence of Jake's hair disaster occurring the night after he'd used our bathroom. "Christine," he said slowly, "you didn't what?" I asked, beginning to clean up the broken coffee mug with deliberate care. "Didn't notice that my expensive shampoo was disappearing? Didn't wonder why our guest bathroom towels were always damp? Didn't ask you directly about it, only to be told I was imagining things?" Dylan opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, like a fish gasping for air. Outside, Jake had reached his car and was fumbling with his keys while trying to keep his baseball cap positioned strategically. Mrs. Henderson had apparently recruited Mrs. Martinez into the viewing party, and both women were standing in their respective yards, making no effort to hide their fascination with the morning's spectacle. "I can explain," Dylan finally managed. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary," I said, sweeping ceramic shards into the dustpan with steady hands. I understand the situation perfectly now. Jake needed to use our shower. You graciously offered our guest bathroom. He helped himself to my toiletries. Unfortunately, it seems he had a rather dramatic reaction to one of my hair products. You did this on purpose, Dylan said, and it wasn't a question. I solved a mystery, I corrected. I was curious about why my shampoo kept disappearing, so I conducted a little experiment. The results were quite illuminating. Outside, Jake had managed to get into his car, but starting it apparently required removing his baseball cap long enough to check his rearview mirror. The full effect of his green hair was now visible to anyone in the vicinity, and I noticed that the Johnsons from the end of the street had wandered over to see what was causing such interest. "You're insane," Dylan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" I asked, straightening up from my cleaning. "Or am I just a woman who got tired of being gaslit in her own home?" Jake's car finally started, and he pulled out of his driveway with the careful speed of someone hoping to attract as little attention as possible. This strategy might have worked better if his hair weren't currently visible from space. Dylan sank into a kitchen chair, looking like a man who'd just watched his carefully constructed house of cards collapse in real time. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "I suspected for weeks," I said, rinsing the dustpan in the sink. "I confirmed it 2 days ago. But you know what the really sad part is, Dylan? If you'd just asked me, if you'd said, 'Jake needs to use our shower sometimes,' is that okay? I probably would have said yes. I might have even bought him his own shampoo." Dylan looked up at me with something that might have been hope. "But instead," I continued, "you let me think I was losing my mind. You made me feel stupid for noticing what was happening in my own house. You turned my reasonable observations into evidence of my unreliability. That's the part I can't forgive." The hope died in his eyes. "So what happens now?" he asked. I looked out the window where the neighborhood's entertainment value for the day was probably just getting started. By evening, Jake's green hair would be the talk of every dinner table within a 6-block radius. By Monday, it would be office gossip at every workplace in town. The beautiful thing about public humiliation is its efficiency. No explanations needed, no complicated stories required, just visible, undeniable consequences that speak for themselves. "Now," I said, "I'm going to pack a suitcase. I'm going to stay at Linda's for a few days while I look for an apartment. And you're going to figure out how to explain to our neighbors why our young friend, Jake, suddenly looks like a walking lawn care advertisement. Christine, please." "Oh, and Dylan," I continued, as if he hadn't spoken, "you might want to check our savings account. I transferred some money yesterday. Just my earnings from the recent contracts. I thought it was time I had my own financial independence." Dylan's face went from pale to gray. "How much money?" "Enough," I said simply. "Enough for a security deposit, enough for lawyer consultation fees, enough to give me options you apparently thought I didn't have." I walked toward the stairs, then paused and looked back at him. "You know, the funny thing is Jake's hair will grow out eventually. The green will fade. In a few months, this will just be an embarrassing story he tells at parties. But what you did, making me doubt my own perceptions, dismissing my concerns, lying to my face, that kind of damage doesn't wash out so easily." Dylan sat at the kitchen table staring at his hands, looking older than his 53 years. I went upstairs to pack, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the sound of neighbors gathering outside to discuss the morning's unexpected entertainment. Through the bedroom window, I could see that Jake's car was gone, but the damage was done. The story would spread with the reliable efficiency of suburban gossip networks. By noon, everyone would know. By evening, everyone would have theories, and Dylan would have to live with all of it. The questions, the knowing looks, the slowly dawning realization that actions have consequences, even when you think nobody's watching, especially when you think nobody's watching. 3 weeks later, I sat in my new studio apartment, sipping coffee from a mug that belonged entirely to me, watching the morning news with the sound turned low. The apartment wasn't much, 400 square feet of basic furniture and neutral walls, but it had something my beautiful suburban home had lacked for months: peace. My bottle of lavender jasmine shampoo sat on the bathroom shelf, still 3/4 full, exactly where I'd left it 3 days ago, exactly where it would remain until I chose to use it. The simple pleasure of having my belongings stay where I put them, of using my own products without worrying about mysterious depletion, had proven more satisfying than I'd anticipated. It's remarkable how much mental energy you don't realize you're spending on low-level anxiety until that anxiety disappears. The divorce papers were filed. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in cases where one spouse had been financially manipulated, had reviewed my documentation with professional approval. "You prepared well," she'd said during our consultation. "Separate accounts, documented evidence of deception, clear timeline of events. This should be straightforward." I'd kept the details simple in the legal filing: irreconcilable differences, breakdown of trust, incompatible financial management styles. Nothing about green hair or shampoo bottles or young men with keys to houses they didn't own. Some stories are too perfect to waste on court documents. Dylan had called 17 times in the first week. The messages progressed through predictable stages: confusion, anger, bargaining, promises to change. I'd listened to each one once, then deleted them. There's something clarifying about hearing someone apologize only after they've been caught, only after consequences have arrived. The neighborhood had provided weeks of entertainment, according to Linda, who'd become my unofficial intelligence source. Jake had apparently disappeared for 10 days, visiting family, someone claimed, and returned with a buzz cut that eliminated the green hair problem but left him looking like a different person entirely. "Mrs. Martinez said he won't make eye contact with anyone anymore," Linda reported during one of our coffee meetings. "And Dylan's been getting some interesting looks at the grocery store. People are putting pieces together." I felt no satisfaction in Dylan's social discomfort, but I felt no pity either. He'd made choices. Choices have consequences. Adults understand this equation, even when they don't like the results. My phone buzzed with a text from my boss. "Henderson Group wants to extend your contract another 2 years. Impressed with your recent performance. Can we discuss terms Monday?" I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. Looking forward to it." The work had become easier somehow. Traveling felt like freedom again, rather than escape. Hotel rooms offered solitude instead of respite. I'd closed 3 major deals in the past month, negotiating with the confidence of someone who no longer worried about what was happening at home while she was away. That evening, I walked to the small cafe 2 blocks from my apartment, ordered dinner for one, and sat by the window with a book I'd been meaning to read for months. At the next table, a young couple was having an intense discussion about something that seemed very important to them at the time. "But how do I know if you're telling the truth?" the woman was asking, her voice tight with frustration. The man gestured impatiently. "You just have to trust me. Why would I lie about something like this?" I looked up from my book, remembering similar conversations from my own past. The woman looked familiar. Not her face, but her expression. The doubt, the second-guessing, the exhausting mental gymnastics of trying to convince yourself that your instincts were wrong. Without thinking, I leaned slightly toward their table. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "I don't mean to eavesdrop, but trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is." The woman looked at me with surprise, then something that might have been recognition. Not of me specifically, but of the situation itself. "Thank you," she said softly. I returned to my book, but I noticed that the couple's conversation shifted after that. Less pleading, more listening. Sometimes all someone needs is permission to believe what they already know. Later that night, as I got ready for bed in my small, quiet apartment, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman who made excuses for unexplained discrepancies in her own home. Now I was a woman who trusted her observations, acted on her instincts, and slept through the night without wondering what was happening while she wasn't watching. The divorce would be final in 3 months. The apartment lease could convert to yearly if I decided to stay. I had savings, steady work, and the particular freedom that comes from taking responsibility for your own happiness instead of waiting for someone else to provide it. My phone rang once that night. Dylan, calling from our old number. I looked at the screen for a moment, then turned the phone face down and went to sleep. Some conversations are over before they begin. The next morning brought coffee that tasted exactly as strong as I'd made it, shampoo that lasted as long as it should, and the quiet satisfaction of a life that finally belonged entirely to me. I'd learned something valuable in those months of missing toiletries and gaslighting conversations. Betrayal reveals itself, but only if you're willing to see it. The real tragedy isn't when someone lies to you. It's when you lie to yourself about what you already know. Dylan had cost me a marriage, some money, and several bottles of expensive shampoo. But he'd given me something more valuable in return. The unshakable knowledge that my instincts were worth trusting, my observations were worth believing, and my peace of mind was worth protecting. That seemed like a fair trade. What would you have done in Christine's situation? Have you ever had to trust your instincts when everyone else told you that you were wrong? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more tales of quiet revenge and hard-won wisdom.